Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Daniel Bose. I serve as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the ACLU of North Carolina and use he and him pronouns. I am walking today along with many others, including many of you who have joined us outside the North Carolina Executive Mansion today as part of the Vigil for Freedom and Racial Justice. Really appreciate the North Carolina Justice Center taking the time to put these community conversations together. And really excited about the one we're going to have today that specifically focuses on the profit motive of the prison industrial complex. And so really excited for Cierra, Dr. Arriaga, and Kristie Puckett Williams to join us today. Three individuals who know these issues from different perspectives, but know them deeply and well, and are here to share their insights with us, but also really looking to what needs to change and how it can change. So, and again, a lot of that is the reason why we're out at the North Carolina Executive Mansion. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm gonna get started. We're trying to make this as much of a community conversation as possible. So we'll hear, I'll set the stage for a couple minutes, then I'll go to the panelists and ask them to do an introduction. Then we'll have some specific questions and open it up for questions. So this is as good a place to start as any. I'm outside the governor's mansion right now. You can see here that the marker in front of it acknowledges the use of prison labor to build what is a beautiful building. And actually that was pretty common in North Carolina and still is today, but a lot of the buildings in downtown Raleigh were actually made by prison labor. Now, another part of this that we brought up in the past is you can actually see the names of individuals who have, the names of individuals who actually were in prison and built the governor's mansion. I'm looking for a, of course I hit a patch where there are no names. I'll point it out when I get to one where there is, but you know, the point of this is that continuously, people, especially Black and brown people, have been, constantly used as a tool of money making. And we saw that obviously with slavery. And in North Carolina in particular, what happened was as soon as slavery became an illegal institution, you saw the prison system drastically increase because with the passage of the 13th Amendment, you could still enslave someone, but you could only do it based on the commission of a crime or the conviction of a crime. And so saw all sorts of loopholes with that. And initially, one of the worst parts was leasing, where you could actually, they would lease prisoners to, private companies outside of the, across the state. And what we saw there is, in some cases, the treatment was actually worse than under slavery, if that can be believed, because again, individuals were being leased. And so if you worked a man to death and he died, you would just ask for another one from the prison, and basically that, you leased a person and they had expired, and so you expected another person to be put in their place. And so it is really that inhumane from the very beginning. And so what we're going to talk about today again is how that still happens every day across North Carolina, whether you're talking about work release or correction enterprises. So that brings us to the first panelist, Kristie Puckett Williams. Many of you know her as a ferocious advocate across the state on all things carceral. She's been willing to share her truth in so many different audiences, and it just makes a profound difference. And really excited for her to talk to us today about 101-year-old Correction Enterprises, which is a state entity that actually makes products. And so, Kristie, let me turn it over to you now. Start out with whatever sort of introduction you want to lay, but I hope that you'll focus in on Correction Enterprises and the harm that causes in North Carolina.
Yes, I will. Thank you, Daniel. And hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kristie Puckett Williams. I serve as the Deputy Director at the ACLU of North Carolina for Engagement and Mobilization. And I'm also a person who is formerly incarcerated and directly impacted by mass incarceration. And I think at you all's last conversation, if you were able to hear the community conversation, the connection between mass incarceration and chattel slavery was laid out for everyone, and how the 13th Amendment allowed for the enslavement of mostly Black, brown people of low wealth. And I think it's important for folks to really understand what that means, that incarcerating people is big business still today for local, state, and federal governments. And our comrades and allies at Critical Resistance defines the prison industrial complex as the overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. There are many ways that power is collected and maintained through the prison industrial complex, including creating mass media images that keep alive stereotypes of people of color, poor people, queer people, immigrants, youth, and other oppressed communities as criminal, delinquent, or deviant. This power is also maintained by earning huge profits for companies that deal with prisons and police forces, helping earn political gains for tough on crime politicians, increasing the influence of prison guard and police unions, and eliminating social and political dissent by oppressed communities that make demands for self-determination and reorganization of power in this country. And here in North Carolina, as Daniel stated, a really good example of this overlap of prison and industry that helps to create power for our state is correctional enterprises. And I'm going to read directly from their website with a couple of notes along the way. From their website, in 1900, 3 years before the Wright brothers' humanity-changing first flight at Kitty Hawk, another historic event took place 100 miles east at Tillery. The state of North Carolina launched a prison industry system on an 8,000-acre tract of farmland, my note, former plantation, surrounding Roanoke River Prison, which was also known as Caledonia for many years, which was also the name of the plantation that it received its inheritance from. So now, more than 120 years later, incarcerated people are still harvesting crops there, and Correctional Enterprises has become the third largest prison industries organization in the United States. Again, Correctional Enterprises, founded here in North Carolina, has become the third largest prison industries organization in the United States. And although their products and services have evolved through the years, one thing has remained constant. This is what from their website, y'all. They have a passion for creating a safer North Carolina through the training and transformation of state prison offenders to reduce recidivism. And so we know, though, that before there was ever a Correctional Enterprises in 1900, folks in prison were already working to build the executive mansion that Daniel was in front of. The mansion was completed in 1891, and it took a very long time to complete. So we can clearly see that there was no real disruption of free labor after slavery ended here in North Carolina. It just transformed to prison labor. And I think if we look at a significant date in the history of Correctional Enterprises, one of those significant dates I would say is 1957. And this is when the prison system separated from the Highways Commission, now the DOT, and Correctional Enterprises. And it's placed under the Department of Corrections. And is the Correctional Enterprises becomes, instead of Prison Industry Services, it changes its name to Correctional Enterprises. But this separation from the highway, Division of Highways, which is now, we know it as the North Carolina DOT, was not a complete separation. There are still ties between the adult prisons and North Carolina Department of Transportation, from shared land and facilities being right next to one another. When we did the Prison Solidarity Tour in 2020, Daniel and I and other advocates were able to physically witness prisons and DOT equipment and facilities being right next to each other. So again, that separation was on paper only. I'm sure you all have seen buses of men in green clothes on the side of the highway, cleaning the highway, right? Also, those green signs on the highway are today still made by incarcerated people. And so today there are more than 30 correctional enterprise facilities across prisons in North Carolina. And those prisons, those facilities do everything from clothing and linen products for jails and prisons, or professional and casual wear, safety vests and gear. They make employee service awards. They make all the food that folks who are incarcerated eat. When we visited a prison not too long ago, we were told that the Roanoke River Prison, the former plantation, they produce and collect about 40,000 eggs a day. 40,000 eggs a day. They make different various gifts and retirement products for state staff. Again, they do make products for jails and prisons, such as janitorial products. They make all the cleaning products inside of prisons, license plates and tags, metal, oils and lubricants, office furniture, office seating. They make and clean the state, city, and county parks. They make prescription eyewear. So if you're a Medicaid recipient and you receive a prescription and you send, it takes about 6 weeks to come back. They send it into the state lab. That state lab is staffed by people who are incarcerated. Science lab furnishings. They make signs, yard and porch signs, COVID-19 products. Now, let me tell you why COVID-19 products is a little off-putting for me. Because Daniel is standing out in front of a letter as well, that when we collected surveys back in 2020, when the pandemic first hit, folks inside were reporting to us that they were not receiving any PPV, no protection, but yet the state is forcing them to make these materials to sell around the world, but not providing those same materials to them. They also do things like provide laundry services for around the world. They make Braille transcription, they reupholster, and they do all of the printing for the state.
Kristie, can you talk about how the correction enterprises is actually integrated into the prisons? Like, what would if a person was working for correctional enterprises, what does that look like in terms of what do they pay generally, or what do they, because as you were saying that, I was thinking one of the biggest issues with is that they continue to move people between facilities to staff the correctional enterprises, right? Like during the COVID, that was one of the biggest issues is that profit trumps safety. And so, yeah, just sort of what does it look like to be a prison worker for correctional enterprises?
I mean, it means that you get up every day and you go to work like you and I do, and you get paid significantly less. You don't get the opportunity to complain about the conditions. You don't get to control your hours or your days off. You are enslaved. The money that you do have, you have to, as you'll hear, go to pay fees and fines, various court fees and fines, but also the various fees and fines that are associated with being incarcerated. So if your family member tries to if you want to buy things off a commissary, if you want to make telephone calls, if you want to stay connected to family, that costs. And so oftentimes we know people are working for weeks just to be able to make a couple of phone calls to their family members a month. And so it looks like working and not receiving a real benefit. And it's not like they shaving no real time off for you, get no real credit so you can get out of jail not get out of prison early. That's not happening. And so an incarcerated worker is a worker like you and I without any rights. And again, the reason that they move those folks around in that time during the pandemic, despite being a pandemic, the reason that they did that, you all, is for very simple reasons. They serve so many folks. They're the third largest in this country, remember? And so what does that mean? They serve state governments, counties, cities, airports. I mean, I could go on and on. Nonprofits, fire and rescue. They serve community college, public schools, UNC system universities, contractors working on government projects, National Guard members, government hospitals and clinics are all receive services and products that originate from enslaved, incarcerated people's labor to this day.
Awesome. So I want to circle back to Kristie, but I want to bring in Cierra now. Kristie, you mentioned, let's say somebody does make, these suppressed wages, in prison. Then they have to go toward paying fines and fees and canteen, and that's sort of like what's known. But what's less known are all the administrative, especially around family engagement. Cierra, I know you as let me come on camera to actually say this to your face. I know you to be a fierce advocate, Cierra. I know you do it both to support your community, but also because you have a loved one who is incarcerated, who you are trying to maintain a meaningful, intimate relationship with. And so in that sort of setting, can you introduce us to the fees that you face when, trying to stay connected to your family member or really anybody who's trying to stay connected to their family member in jails, but especially in prisons?
Yeah, hey, thanks for being here today. My name is Cierra Cobb. I am the family advocate and jail and prison coordinator for Emancipate NC. And so like Daniel and Kristie was saying, not only are they enslaving our loved ones, but they're also enslaving the families as well. I don't know if you know, but third of the families own the fees and fines, and that's about maybe $1 billion that we pay to just stay in contact with our loved ones, because the phone cost is a lot. Like say if you put $100 on the phone, you got to add maybe a $20 fee, close to a $20 fee, just to put that amount of money on the phone. And I'm directly impacted. So I talk to my husband a lot, and we also have a podcast and do a lot of things, a lot of business things. And so we have to conversate a lot. And in 2 months, I added up that I spent $642 just on the phone alone. That's not adding the JPay fees. That's not adding your text behind fees. That's not adding your monthly or your quarterly packages. So altogether, if we add that all together for about a year, that's about $8,000. And we're not going to add in the expense to travel when you want to go visit. When he was 3 hours away, I would have to get a hotel room. So that was hotel fees, eating, gas, and then going to see him for 30 minutes, because that was at the time we were during COVID. And so you were only getting 30-minute visits, non-contact. And I would drive 3 hours just to see my husband for 30 minutes. So that was another fee for me as well. And so I was just reading something from the Ella Baker Foundation, and they said that 87% of family members are responsible for calls and visits were women, and that 1 out of 3 more of women went into debt just to stay in contact with their loved one. So imagine you having children that you have to feed, you have daily living on top of the daily living that you have to take care of for your incarcerated loved one, whether it's a husband, brother, sister. So not only are they enslaving the families, enslaving the people that are incarcerated, they're also enslaving the families. So they're making money off the incarcerated people, and they're making billions and billions of dollars off of the family members as well, because we also have to pay for anytime they do medical. That's $10 every visit, whether they get seen or not. You have to pay for glasses. If they get glasses, you have to pay. So everything they do, the families are paying for. So you can average maybe about $10,000 a year just to take care of your loved one. And the state wants to make it seem like that they take the burden of the bear, and they don't. It's really the families that we take all the brunt. And so imagine what it is now when we're in the middle of inflation and you have groceries that are extremely high, and just everyday living now is a lot higher than it was 3 and 4 years ago. And then you're trying to maintain just simple contact with your loved one. That we're not talking about visiting, we're just talking about talking on the phone or sending mail, because at first you could just put a 25-cent stamp on a letter and send it. Now you have to go through text behind, and they're not guaranteed to get that, because I get a lot of complaints about people not receiving their mail. Now, let me remind you, all they have to do is go print it out on the computer and hand them their mail. It's not like they have to officially, go through the envelopes and all of that. They just print it out and hand it to them. And now they're not wanting to do that. So we have to pay to send mail that they don't get. And then we have to pay to send messages on the tablet, 25 cents per message for the family members. It's $15 plan for them. So, and then I have a lot of people that I respond to because I'm an advocate, and that's the only way for me to stay in contact with them really now is through the tablet. And so imagine how much I'm having to pay just to stay in contact with my clients and my husband. And so it's really expensive. And so just think about, imagine how us as a community, and this community that we have here with us today, can tackle just the $1 billion that North Carolina is making off of incarcerated people and their loved ones.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to pop in real quick and just let you know we're about to launch a poll that will kind of gauge our audience participation on what your familiarity with a lot of these prison motives are. So I'm going to launch that real quick. Feel free to answer that, and then I will I'll let you take that back. But just feel free to answer those questions on what you are familiar with when it comes to the profit motives of the carceral system. Please feel free to answer that. All you, Daniel.
Hey, Timothy, I was gonna wait for you to read off the results of that poll if you want to, or
Yeah, sure.
Muscle.
Yeah, we have results kind of coming in right now. Most people are familiar with correction enterprises and text behind. It seems that the things people are least familiar with is the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, and some people are have somewhat familiarity with JPay as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Cierra, thank you very much for that introduction. I guess one question I have is, it sounds like the group doesn't know exactly what JPay is. Can you just provide a few more details on that and any sort of experience you've had with that?
Yeah, so JPay is where we deposit money on their account if they want to be able to buy stuff out of canteen. And so it just depends on what class custody you are, the amount you get. So if you're in closed custody, it's $40 a week. If you're in medium custody, it is $60 a week. And I do believe if you are in minimum, it is $70, I want to say, a week. And so you have a fee associated with that. That is a $6 fee. So if you want to put $60 on your loved one's account, you have to put $68 and some change on their account. And a lot of people don't have the fee, so you have to go figure out where you're going to get the extra $6 from. And to me, a $6 fee just to put $60 on the account is outrageous. And so once again, you know, there is another fee that you have to pay and be responsible for each week, because that is a weekly thing if you want your loved ones to be able to eat.
And have you, I'm sure you've seen it with others, and I'm just curious, sort of in your own experience, have you had to forfeit, you know, a visit with your partner? Have you had to, you know, not communicate as much as you want because of the fines and fees?
Yes, there's been several times, you know, before I got into a decent situation where we couldn't talk for days because I just didn't have the money to put on the phone, or I would only have maybe $10 or $20 to put on his account. And imagine him having to use $10 or $20 for a whole week, just because I didn't have the money, the extra money to add, you know, for the fees.
Okay, we'll circle back. I really appreciate that introduction. Thank you, Cierra. Let me bring Dr. Arriaga on. She is an expert on many things, but what is she's joining us today to talk about sort of the profit motive in the immigration context. And I will say that after this event, we can circulate some slides like a true professor. She went above and beyond and did some really good slides. And so, but she's not going to use those today. But thank you, Dr. Arriaga. Please tell us about, you know, this problem in the immigration context.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. And I always say too that like I have 16 weeks of content on some of this stuff, so that's why I usually just have the slides ready. I'm going to start, and I'll come back to the poll in a second, but I'm definitely excited to be here with this conversation. So I think started to look at even this conversation around sort of profit actually in my own hometown. So I'm from Hendersonville, North Carolina, out in Henderson County in Western North Carolina. And for some of my dissertation research, I was interested in how local immigration enforcement partnership was working in the state of North Carolina. And so one of the things that I started to dig into was some people might think really boring reading of county commissioner documents and trying to dig into the budget. I had been doing some budget advocacy work in Durham with Durham Beyond Policing. And so was really just interested in sort of thinking about how locally we sort of participate in immigration enforcement. And so I started to come across these like very explicit sort of language in the county documents. I was interviewing some like community members about sort of some of the profit motivations early on and sort of like the around 2006 in North Carolina. And so I was actually really surprised by how explicit both people were about like their desire to lock up immigrants in particular, but also how explicit they were about like, this is going to bring money into the county because they're going to get reimbursed by the federal government to be able to sort of incarcerate immigrants locally at the jails. And so I just was really interested in sort of like, it's sort of this very explicit way that people were talking about it. And to the extent too that like in Henderson County, they actually set up a separate fund, which I have like a little story map that I can drop in the chat that has some of those numbers, but like at the height of sort of between 2008 and 2015 in Henderson County, in 1 year, there was like $850,000 that was put aside specifically for this local immigration enforcement partnership. Other sort of places across the state, I think, weren't as explicit, which maybe tells you a little bit about the county itself, and sort of how much money they were looking to get back from the federal government for holding individuals. So that really sort of like struck me as just an interesting part of this relationship of sort of like how local governments are actually profiting off of incarceration too, right? And I know that that's probably consistent across some of our work, right? Some of the other things I've looked into since then is looking at, I think Cierra and both Kristie mentioned, or at least Cierra mentioned sort of JPay, but also thinking about what are the kickbacks or how much of that revenue for like local jails and sheriff offices also goes back into their budget, right? And so we can always think about too that profit, while for some folks it means sort of communicating with family members, for the local jails, they sign on to these contracts that allows them to get some of that money back, right? And then they use it in sort of their daily functionings for the jails and in their budget. So that's sort of one way that I started to look at it more locally, but sort of at a federal level, what the poll question asked about the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004. And I also didn't know much about this until I started to sort of research the broader immigration detention system. But that particular act actually pushed, at least at the federal level or more sort of at the national level, for there to be, for the private prison industry to actually work alongside sort of immigrant detention to make sure that there was available beds for immigrants in sort of these federal, at the federal level. And so that particular act basically pushed for the increase of about 8,000 beds each year from 2006 to 2010. And sort of included this other component around sort of quotas and making sure that those beds were filled. Right. And so I think many of us probably would say, or at least like have seen in this space that if you build it, right, they're going to fill them. Right. And so that's, I think, really important, too, when we think about sort of immigrant detention at a bigger level, because they're filling those usually, at least for immigrant detention, 65% of those immigrant detention centers across the country, which are a little different than our local sort of jails in the ways that we hold them locally, are operated by private prison companies, right? And so I think the question always becomes is how do we actually know what's going on within the private institutions? We think as far as like oversight, sometimes we have a little bit of a way to really dig in when it comes to what's going on in sort of these public institutions, right? Sometimes, I won't say it's perfect because many of us have probably tried to get some information out of local jails or prisons that are run by the state, and we still can't get much information. But there really is, it's challenging to get any of that information for private prison companies too, right? So we know those institutions are getting rich off of incarcerating immigrants. And so we sort of see this happening at different levels. And I think actually at the state level for the prison system in North Carolina, we have the least amount of information about what those profit motivations are. So I'm always sort of eager to work with y'all to try to dig in there, because I do think we actually don't hear enough about how the state prison system, what they do with immigrants once they've served their criminal charges.
Thank you very much. I think you captured it pretty well with that one line. If they build it, they will fill it, and we see that time and again, both in the immigration context, but even with different jails, basically taking on prisoners from other places and getting compensated for that. And so what would you say, Dr. Arriaga, is the impact on immigrants of this? What is the and how does it diverge from the system of justice that people deserve?
Yeah, I mean, I think the impact on I think there's different sort of impacts on immigrants, right? So I think for at least like at the national level, if you're in an immigrant detention center, the ability to get out is challenging in itself, right? Because you might not have the ability to do that. But we also know that like this isn't like the same across groups too. We know that like for Black folks, like it is quite hard for Black immigrants in particular. We see that there's like definitely discrepancies and disproportionate sort of treatment of those folks. So both that they're at greater risk at deportation, but also that their bails are often higher than non-Black immigrants, right? So even if they're able to sort of like try to navigate out of the immigrant detention system, it's a challenge for them too. I think at the local level, I think I'm going to rephrase a little bit, Daniel, just because I think yes, it's costly for immigrants to sort of navigate this system, and for anyone, right, to navigate this system. But I also think that if we're sort of serious about, I think abolishing the carceral state, we also have to think about like how we're also invested in like upholding this, right? I think about it as like, if we're upholding white supremacy, we're also upholding the profit motivations, right, that we're seeing here. And so the reason that I really sort of take this approach of looking at county local budgets is because we as taxpayers have a responsibility to know where our money is going, right? And so for me, I always think about it as, yes, it's definitely impacting immigrants, but it's actually impacting all of our abilities to thrive in our communities if we sort of see that those budgets and that sort of allocation is going to something that's really going to separate our families more broadly.
Awesome, thank you. So I want to open it up for discussion now. And let me highlight, that a big part of the Decarcerate Coalition and, sort of advocates, especially impacted advocates at the North Carolina General Assembly last year, was focusing on fines and fees. And, I just want to highlight that one sort of small victory, but something that would allow us to build on in the advocacy context, is that in House Bill 560, which was public safety reform, there was a provision that basically increased the maximum daily pay for a person in prison from $3 to $5. So one, that shows you just how bad things are, but then two, that it's still progress. And then even beyond that, they also gave the secretary of the Department of Adult Corrections the ability to increase the daily pay for a person working for correction enterprises above $5. So that is a sort of immediate advocacy target right there. Again, it'd be great to get a living wage or any of that stuff, but any way we can make this go in the right direction is progress, and we are making progress there. So I want to open it up. Kristie or Cierra, anything that you heard from Dr. Arriaga that you want to comment on, or with Cierra, anything you want to comment with Kristie, and really just anything you've heard from one of the panelists that you would like to speak
on? Just to highlight what Dr. Arriaga said, that when immigrant communities are caught in the system, they oftentimes have experienced even more victimization at the hands. So they complete their prison sentence and then they're placed into deportation. And just to also highlight, when we talk about immigrant communities, most people think we're talking about Latinx communities, but the rate of deportation for people who are Black, no matter where their country of origin, is 10 times that of other immigrant countries. So when we talk about these issues, we still have to figure out who are we talking about. And most of the time, we are talking about Black poor people, regardless of their country of origin, are experiencing the most brutality inside of the system. And because they are the most disconnected from historical wealth, that means that their families bear the brunt of that financial burden more heavily than any other community. Now, does that mean that we are playing the oppression Olympics? No, but what we are saying is that when you protect Black poor people who are incarcerated, you're literally taking care of every single other category of people. And let me just boil it on down further. If you can protect Black trans people in community, Black trans women in community, then we are thereby protecting every single body. They are the most marginalized inside of carceral spaces. And they, you would think that with all the money that the state makes off the free labor, that the least they would do is keep the people inside healthy enough to keep working for them, but they don't do that. They run them into the ground. They don't care if they die at 30, 40, 50. They have no care or concern for their health, for their well-being. They do not feed them properly, despite them growing the food, making the food. They do not get fed properly. They do not get proper health care. They do not receive any benefit by being incarcerated. The only people who receive benefit are the state and its actors.
Now, I just want to piggyback off of what Kristie said, just to understand that the prison is not keeping anybody safe. Department of Public Safety is not keeping anybody safe. Because when you aren't taking care of the people that's incarcerated and you let them right back out on the street, how is that making it safe? So we have to understand that we really have to get behind and understand what they're doing with their money. And I have taken a budget class. And so it's really important to understand where your money is being funneled to. And I think that that's where we've lost our vision, is not staying up on what our local officials are doing with our money. And we have the power to tell them what to do with the money and where the money goes. And so I think it's really important that we really start looking at your local politicians, your county commissions, your city councils budgets, and see where they're funneling this money to, and then step in and say, hey, I want this money to go here. Because the thing is, people are ended up incarcerated because we don't have regular community resources. We don't have safe housing. They don't have a good sustainable job. They can't even get housing, let alone when they get out, they can't even get on food stamps and things that can help them get to where they need to be. They're sent to shelters and they're right back in the same position they were when they left. So just providing your community with the simple resources will keep people out of incarceration. And so just understanding that we don't have to slave people to make America great or get what we need. We can all work together and get what we need and not slave families and people of incarceration.
Thank you. I want to turn it over to the audience and ask anybody to raise their hand if they want to come on screen and ask any questions for the panelists. And as people do that, I'll just ask the panelists, any other fees or fines or profit motives that you think that people should know about that have not been mentioned? And I know a lot, like, I know Cierra mentioned in passing the medical care, it costs $10 to see the doc, all that sort of stuff. But anything that y'all want to particularly lift up today that you haven't already?
Well, I also want to uplift that if they don't want to do a job, or they turn down a job, or they quit a job, they will get wrote up for that. And then that costs them $10. So you are charging them because you want to write them up for something. So that's another fee that they have to pay for.
Well, that's an excellent point. Thank you. And I'll rely on Timothy a little bit for this. Any questions from the audience or anything that anybody wants to say about a fine or a fee or a profit motive that they've come up against in the carceral state?
Daniel, I just saw one question from the audience in the chat that asked, is correctional enterprises part of the state government, private business, or nonprofit? It is part of the state government. It is entrenched in state government. And so it is a part of the Department of Public Safety. It's a division of the Department of Public Safety. And so they make billions of dollars. They claim to spend billions of dollars. Okay, and that's true. You have to think of it this way. If they are willing to spend billions of dollars to keep people incarcerated, there has to be a return, a huge return on that investment. And that huge return comes from mostly correctional enterprises and the services, the free services, free labor that they receive, but they're able to sell the services and the products of that labor for profit.
Can you also highlight just sort of how this fits into the broader advocacy against the carceral state? One thing I can think of is just that if you can't afford to do it, which they can't already, but if you take away all these sort of profits, then it just means that the system becomes even more sort of inexpensive and sort of, and it's a tactic in some ways. And if you take away the profit motive, maybe you truly do sort of take away the system itself. But any sort of connections that y'all see with the between this work and the broader decarcerate work?
I see this as the bedrock. Like the only reason they hold on so tight and are unwilling to decarcerate is because of the profit motive. If it did not make dollars, it would not make sense. And so it makes them dollars and cents. And so therefore they are able to justify these draconian, torturous, inhumane conditions that they sustain, maintain, and perpetuate every single day. I just want to be clear that whether we're talking about a immigration detention center, a prison, or a jail, it does not matter. The subjugation and commodification of Black, brown, and poor bodies is happening. Why do you think they give them a number? Why you can't remain a name? Because they are itemizing the property that they own, the same way Black people cannot get on Ancestry.com and figure out who their ancestors are because they were property and their names were not listed. The same type of erasure is happening every single day in our communities right now. And so I oftentimes try to tell people, if you tell me what you would have been doing in 1865 when the Emancipation Proclamation was written, if you're not doing that now, you wouldn't have been doing it then. Because if you're not fighting for Black, brown, and poor people to get free and to get liberated, then you are on the sidelines watching the same way your ancestors did, and that's why we're here.
One question we got from Facebook during our live stream is we got a question is the government required to pay for the beds that are not being used in the prison?
So in a private prison industry, yes. So a private prison, North Carolina, let's be clear, does not have private prisons. All of our prisons are state owned. But in states that have private prisons, like our neighbor to the east of us, no, west of us, Tennessee. Tennessee has lots of private prisons because Core Civic, which is a private prison industry, is headquartered there. So what that means is the government signs a contract with Core Civic for a certain amount of beds, whether it's 85%, whatever it is. Anytime that number falls under 85%, they are required to still pay for those beds, regardless of if the beds are full or not. So when we talk about the private prison motives, it's a whole nother conversation that exists, but it just does not happen right now in the state of North Carolina.
I saw a question from Terry in the chat about, has the governor ever commented on prison industries? And that's a really good question, Terry. Governor Cooper has sort of built himself as a supporter of reentry. He did it when he was attorney general, and that was one of his main planks when he ran for governor. But we just really haven't seen the support for the type of necessary change or the change that's warranted come through. And so I have not heard him talk about prison conditions in the way that you would expect him to, whether you're talking about specific COVID or just sort of the general dehumanization in the prison system. And I will say that if you look at his legislative record, there was a bill that I came across where he was looking to expand the profit motive of the carceral state. And it was a bill around correction enterprises. And so, what I say to individuals, which may sound shocking, but I hope once you think through it, it makes sense, is that there is no politician right now in North Carolina who is more responsible for mass incarceration than Governor Rory Cooper. And obviously there are many people who are more responsible before him, but he's the last of a generation. And so this is not about him doing, helping people. It's about him helping rectify harm that he contributed to. And so really, that's why we're out here. I want to end on
Sorry, actually, Daniel, Mary Nelly, I think I might be mispronouncing that. I don't know if you had a question still. Okay, all right, go ahead. Sorry, Daniel.
Oh, she doesn't have a question? Okay.
No, I think it's good.
Then yeah, thank you very much. I'm not looking at the chat very much. I wanted to end by just talking about the different decision makers, right? So Governor Cooper is obviously, he can use clemency to, let people out of prison, stop the whole sort of fines and fees by just not having them in prison. Secretary of Department of Corrections is another one, but just want to highlight just different decision makers and how y'all would recommend people approaching them, whether it's a local sheriff looking at a contract or, that, I guess I'll start there. Dr. Arriaga, is that it? Who makes that decision? Is it just a sheriff making a decision, or is it the county commissioners when you're talking about a contract with ICE or all the various contracts that jails have?
Yeah, as far as the ICE ones, it's mostly just up to the sheriff. That's shifted like earlier on when some of these were agreed upon. There was like some more county commissioners sort of signing on. But at this point, it's really sort of up to the sheriff to make some of those decisions. And then some of the other contracts, I've sort of seen a combination of things with the jails, not beyond sort of immigration related things. Usually, I mean, it's the sheriff who signs that, but depending on sort of what it means for the rest of the budget, as like Cierra mentioned, then sometimes those are routed through the sort of county commissioner level of decision making too, right? And some of those are like really hard to find, right? So I think that's like, Cierra and I have worked on some of the budget stuff before. Like it's really actually hard to find some of that contract information and knowing where that stuff's coming from. And it's also just not contracts, right? It's also like state, federal grants, right, that folks are getting. And one of the things that folks at the Budget and Tax Center, the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, we're doing this year, we're also really diving into how much of those the American Rescue Plan funds were going to incarceration, right? We're going to support local law enforcement. And that was one of the things that we found really interesting, especially I think in the right as sort of like we had so many protests going on in response to the murder of George Floyd, we had local agencies applying for ARP funds to make sure that it was going towards riot gear, right? So I think to go back to Cierra's point, right, we have to know what's going on locally with those funds. And that is a very sort of local process, right? So every year the budget gets passed for the city and county in the middle or in July, but there's months working up towards that we can definitely sort of influence on a regular basis too.
Awesome. Cierra, any sort of like, are there any discretion that you've come across with these fees that you've seen in jails and prisons? Any, sort of local admin who says, okay, I get it, you can't pay this through no fault of your own, here it is, or anything like that you've seen?
No, I haven't experienced that ever, that I've heard an admin say, oh, well, we need to do something about these fees. It's just, other nonprofits that have taken on the burden to go to, your certain legislators and say, hey, these families can't afford this, and going to the FCC to let them know that, it's just too much for somebody to make a phone call. Like, I mean, like I said, the first phone calls used to be $17 a phone call. Now, they're about $2 or $3. If they're calling, it's like $1.60 for them. But just that's, I've never heard that because they're all about making the money and they don't care about the families.
So we're running short on time. I want to open it up to the panelists for any final thoughts, and I'll end by urging people to come to our next community conversation on Thursday at 11 a.m. That one is looking at the war on drugs and efforts to end it. And of course, we'll be talking, part of that is more profit seeking, whether you're talking about the drug tax, whether you're talking about, where police officers can confiscate assets and called asset forfeiture. We'll be hitting on all that, but want to give the panelists a chance to leave us with thoughts. Kristie, do you mind if I start with you?
No, thank you everyone for coming and listening and learning more deeply about the prison industrial complex. The only way we are going to be able to dismantle it is by knowing the many, many ways in which it is entrenched into our everyday existence. And so, I just want to say thank you for coming and listening. I know this can be heavy information, especially if you are someone, you love someone who is incarcerated right now, listening to all of this. So just thank you for listening to us, sharing the space, and continue to fight. Come sit with us in vigil. I know it's going to be cold and rainy this week, but we are out there every day from 11 to 4 until January the 1st. So thanks so much. And I'll pass it to Cierra.
Just thank you. Thank you for, being able to attend and listen to all the good information that was spread. Please reach out to Kristie. She has very good knowledge about the carceral system in whole and can direct you where you need to go. She's also out there at the legislative, when that session starts, if you want to learn how to lobby, Kristie got you. I always reach out to Felicia. She has great information about the budget and things like that. I've taken a budget class with her, and she's helped me a lot understand the sheriff's budget. So please reach out to her. I'm always here if you need me to advocate for anybody that's incarcerated that's going through something inside of a prison or a jail. Call me, and I always get on the phone and get them in shape as best as I can. And just thank you for being here and listening.
I'm so glad we had this conversation. I really appreciate Kristie and Cierra's work all the time. I think divest, invest, that's the way we sort of move forward in general when we think about the carceral state and dismantling it. So I think I'll leave it there. And if you want to hear more about immigration, we have a separate panel, I think, on Tuesday of next week. So if you're interested, come on down, come on over. I don't know. So I'll pass it back to Daniel. And then I don't know if the Justice Center folks actually had a question or if you just wanted to talk.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in and say I just launched a poll. People often ask during these kind of meetings on how people can get involved. And so this poll will ask how you would be willing to support our advocacy efforts, anything from even signing a petition or letter or calling your legislators to even supporting organizing efforts. So if you answer that poll, we will be able to get your information and be able to reach out to you later to help you get connected with those resources to really mobilize. Because the number one thing people want to do when they hear about these systemic issues is how they can help. And so answering that poll will definitely be a big help. So thank you. That's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you again to everybody for joining. Like Kristie said, we'll be continuing to make a spectacle and also stand in solidarity with people across the state who are involved in the carceral state, but really appreciate y'all coming out and look forward to advocating with y'all. Thank you.